Welcome to Behind the Tools. Here's Tradify CEO and your host, Michael Steckler.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Behind the Tools podcast with me, Michael Steckler from Tradify. This week we've been speaking to predominantly tradespeople, tradies who have been on the tools running their business across the world. And this week we've got an accountant. You're an accountant by trade, right, Bryn?
I am an accountant by trade, that's right.
So we have Bryn Harwood from Tradies Accountant, who's based in Kangaroo Point, which is the nice place that I think is opposite Brisbane, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong, should I say?
Yeah, it's the big location's a Storybridge Hotel. If you know the Storybridge Hotel, we're just opposite that.
Great. Okay, cool. So maybe to start, Bryn, do you want to give us a quick overview about kind of how you set up Tradies Accountant and why you set up Tradies Accountant?
Yeah, thanks. So about 5 years ago, we set up Tradies Accountant roughly. And we did that because previously I had another accounting firm and I wanted to specialize in the trade space. So just thought that we could add more value to clients by understanding the industry really, really well. And then through setting that up over 5 years ago, now we're probably up to about 20 people in the company over the whole company. Obviously, we have some different offices offshore as well. Really been providing a lot of advice to trade business owners that are growing their companies. So, really a lot of the clients we deal with might start off, turning over, $400,000, so to speak, just one or two men, and they move up to kind of, having 5 or 6 vans or 7 vans and, turning over $2-3 million. And then they have all those challenges that you have along the journey. And that's where we really help.
Yeah, great. And just to clarify, if those that hadn't worked out that Kangaroo Point is in Australia, because we have listeners all over the world, so I wasn't clear on that potentially, but they probably have heard of Brisbane at least. Anyway, cool. So, and Bryn, where did you see the problem? I mean, you started the business to help those companies you just described who are going through that growth phase and need some help. Was there a catalyst? Was there a company that you were working with or a person you knew that made you think, actually, this is a big opportunity, we should go and help this group?
Kind of. I mean, I worked with a few different trade business owners and saw the challenges there and kind of realized that it is quite specialized. So, and probably the stuff you talk about, or some of the main things there, like job costing, that became specifically important when you were scaling your business up, if you're a trade business owner. Now, if you're an accountant and you have, 50 different industries on your books, you're never really going to understand all the nuances of how contractors work specifically. So, being able to specialize in that space meant that we could add a lot more value to the clients by giving them advice that was going to help them grow their business, as opposed to just doing their tax returns at the end of the year and giving a little bit of, formal or informal advice off the back of historical tax returns.
Yeah, and with that in mind, why do most of your customers sign up with you? What's usually the biggest pain point they're experiencing that makes them feel that they need an accountant? And do they usually have one in place already?
Yeah, generally, a lot of clients will come to us because they've probably been with one accountant that's just done their tax returns and just done that every year and some compliance around that. But what happens is when you're running a small business, you just got an apprentice with you. It's pretty easy to job cost, pretty easy to understand your costings, and there's not a lot to manage. There's not a lot of stuff. So it's, you can just do your tax return at the end of the year. But as you start to hire people and now you've got, if you're an electrician, just as an example, you might have now 8 electricians that are working for you. And you realize the systems that you had at the start aren't going to work for you. And that's when a lot of people start to look out on, well, I need some more advice around this business. How do I grow it? How do I manage these people? How do I manage all my costs? And that's where really we come into it, because we can then provide them advice on, systems they should be looking at, processes they should have, margins, how they should be tracking their margins, those types of things.
Yeah, and the threshold you talked about sort of in an Australia context, you talked about number of vans, but you also mentioned sort of $400,000 up to then when they're sort of hitting that 1 to 2 million. Is there a turnover amount that you think there's a sweet spot where people need more help from an accountancy perspective?
Yeah, I've always kind of thought, it's around that $1 million mark is generally where they if they haven't invested in their accounting and their bookkeeping or their internal processes, that's when they're generally going to need to come to some type of external advisor. So
Yeah.
whether that's, they go to a coach or they go to a systems specialist or they go to a more specialized accountant, I've always thought that's about the number. In saying that, it's really hard in the trade space because you could be turning over 400,000 Australian, just for anyone's in Australia, but you could land a $1 million contract on a commercial job. So your revenue can exponentially grow in trade faster than most other industries.
Yes.
So in saying that, one of the things I've always sort of advised people is always to plan 2-3 years ahead. So you shouldn't, if you're turning over 300 now, you shouldn't necessarily be saying I'm going to do that. I'm kind of, well, if I am doing 4 million in the future, what are the things I need to do now to get me to that point, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And do you see a common, it's interesting, you've worked with lots of these businesses now and businesses that have come to you for help. Is there a common mistake that tradies are making in Australia that you see, or something you usually have to clean up or help with from the get-go?
Yeah, there's probably a few things people fundamentally do wrong. I guess one's, pull too much money out of the company before they've earned it, or spend their money before they've earned it. So we see that happening a bit. Like you get a big contract and there's a lot of profit in it, you think, so you start pulling money out of the company for personal reasons. Not investing in the company in certain areas, like not investing in your systems, looking for the cheapest alternatives. So, some people, when they come to us or when they come to a system selection, the motivation for why they're doing it, that will drive by price a lot. Right. So how much is this going to cost? Where, a lot of the time it should be driven by, what value is this going to add, or is this going to help me achieve the goals that I'm trying to achieve? So, I mean, they're two, common mistakes. Obviously there'd be a lot more, but they're two that I see a lot.
And the first one is, you mean someone signed up a reasonable size commercial contract or something, and then they've gone and spent some money on something personally because they're looking forward to getting that money, which they might not receive for 6 months. Is that the general gist of what you were saying?
Yeah, it is. Like, you could get a couple of progress claims in the door and then all of a sudden you've got this money and, now you think, oh, we'll go and buy that brand new Range Rover, or we'll go and, we can afford now to, spend here and there. But, it only comes to one claim not being accepted by a builder, and then the builder's challenging you. And then, all of a sudden you go from kind of hero to zero really fast, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
and then are they coming to you in those instances to say, like, I've got a cash flow problem, can you help me resolve this? Is that usually the pain point?
Yeah, I mean, that's, another one that drives the decision a lot can be cash flow. So a lot of people will come in and say, hey, I've got bad cash flow, how do I fix it? And, generally a lot of people are trying to, manage cash flow management, or all these other tools. But the reality is, when you have a cash flow challenge, you want to kind of rewind back and look at the profitability on jobs. So generally, from my experience, most cash flow issues are driven by the fact that they're not tracking their job profitability properly. That's probably one of the major issues is, not tracking the guys. Once you've got 10 guys working, if they're out there and you're not tracking all of the material costs and all of the labor costs, you can quite easily be losing money on jobs and you just don't know it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, that's I mean, it's a pain point we try and help with, but that seems to be a common complaint. And one of the big things I've heard more recently, and this is sort of, I guess, a question that has two parts. COVID, unfortunately, has had a huge impact across the board, and I don't think the trades have been entirely had relief entirely from that across the board. There's obviously been some upside in terms of the amount of renovations and stuff that's happened in that period. How did you view that? What's the impact you saw with the customers and the trades that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, for us, and this is, just on an Australia basis, but we were quite blessed in some respects that, the trade industry kept going through, bar the lockdown in Melbourne, the second lockdown in Melbourne, where things started to come to a halt there. But, the trade businesses seem to be doing more and more work than ever. So, we didn't find that there was a major kind of hurdle there. And obviously the government, gave a lot of money out through JobKeeper and other stimulus packages. So there's a lot of money that went into the economy. But I guess, where it's probably the bigger challenge that we've probably faced is a supply side issue at the moment where, people can't get materials, or the material prices have gone up. And people in Australia in particular, labour is becoming a big problem. Obviously, our borders are shut here in Australia. So, you just can't get enough quality workers to do the work without immigration, I think. So, those are probably the two big challenges that we've seen on the back end of COVID, I guess.
Yeah, that was the second part of my question, was in relation to supplies. That definitely seems to be, I think there is definitely a workforce issue in terms of just being able to, lots of tradies have got more work than they can cope with, but they haven't got the people to do the work. That's definitely an issue that we're seeing across the world, actually. And the second one is around supplies. Do you have any advice on the supplies one? I mean, I've seen people that are doing, part invoicing and all sorts of, because they're ordering supplies a lot earlier than they might have done historically. Have you sort of seen any things that your customers are doing to solve for that issue?
Yeah, I mean, the supply side issue, really, it's quite challenging, I guess you'd say, because in some instances, there's not much you can do. Like if you're a builder and you order 14 crates and you get 3 crates to do frames, I mean, it's going to be pretty challenging. It's not. I know that, here with some of the contracts, I'm seeing people enter into contracts with clients with provisional sums for a lot of the amounts, as opposed to doing the fixed price, we fix it all in. They're making more provisional sums on the contracts.
Right.
So I guess that means you can still keep the margin that you were hoping to get off the actual overall build. On a contractor perspective, those materials, I guess most of those material costs are getting passed on generally down the line to the builder. So, it is definitely a big issue, and it's kind of ironic that, previous to COVID, you probably had this scenario where people looking for more work, didn't have enough work. And then all of a sudden people have got so much work that they can't actually do it all. And then you've got a supply side issue. So, it's kind of one of those things.
Yeah, definitely. And then another question, for those people that are on this podcast listening and sort of maybe haven't got an accountant, do you need an accountant? Now, the reason I don't mean that's a funny question to ask you, but if you're under that sort of $400,000 we talked about, what would your advice be to those people that maybe those sole traders or just a couple of people companies? Like, what's your advice in terms of how to think about, having an accountant?
Yeah, look, and that this is where I'd say with your planning, it should always be start with an end in mind. So, if you're small and you're planning on just, being a sole trader and maybe having an apprentice, and you're happy doing that, you want to make however much you make off that, and that's happy for you, then you probably only need that accountant to do your tax and compliance. You might not need anything else. So that might work really well for you. If on the other hand, you've just come out, you really want to put some runs on the board, you want to grow a business and you want to turn this into something bigger, my advice would be invest in accounting earlier rather than waiting until you hit all these challenges. Because, two things is, once it becomes a mess, it's a lot harder to fix it. So, if you're going to make a system change, once you've got a lot of people on the tool, that's a massive business disruption, massive change. That's going to end up costing you more. So, if you invest in that at the start and even almost overinvest, then you can just almost scale your business straight through it because all your systems are set up, your accounting's done. You know that you can grow to 15 people, 20 people, 30 people without having to make these massive business changes. And, I think that all stems from starting with an end in mind. I think you want to plan your business out, where you want it to go to, what you want it to get, and then have the other things aligned to that on the journey.
And other things, before maybe finding a sort of a full-time accountant, are there things you would recommend that trades businesses do first? Is there like a hygiene list that you tend to recommend for someone if you had a friend who was doing this and they're on their own that they should have?
I had the 10 financial mistakes business owners or trade business owners make on our website, just tradiesaccountant.com. But, apart from that, I guess I don't have a checklist, so to speak, but I would say, that start with the end in mind would be my checklist. Like sit down with an advisor or a mentor or somebody that's been there before and done it and start to really make that plan out, as I say. And then off the back of that, you'll be able to figure out what people you're going to need on your team. Because I've always found your accountant should be part of your team, your external team or your internal team. And, same as lawyer, same as bank manager, same as, consultant / coach. Those are all positions that should be on your team.
Yeah. And then sort of, bearing in mind, so for the rest of the world, sort of end of financial year is fast approaching in Australia. Financial year finishes at the end of June here. What do you think anyone that's listening to this that's sort of thinking about their end of year tax returns and everything else that goes with that in Australia, any advice on the big lookouts and things they should do?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say to clients, and, this is probably probably worldwide, but in Australia specifically, is a lot of people focus on how would I minimize my tax. Now, I think that your focus should always be driven by how do I build my wealth, how do I make more money, how do I create a portfolio, whether a business portfolio, a personal portfolio. So concentrate on building wealth and having money in the bank first, as opposed to getting taxed down. Now, I'm caveating that by saying, you do want to get taxed down. Obviously, that's part of what you do, but it should be strategically done. So you shouldn't be getting to 30 June thinking, oh, I'm just going to go and spend this money on tools and tax deductions and other things like that, or vehicles, when you haven't thought about, does that align with my wealth, prospects, So if you're paying money in tax, you're making profit, and that should be what you're trying to achieve, is making profit. Then on the back end of that, look at, what do we need to do? How can we legally get our tax down? Are we structured correctly? What things should we do now that we can claim, so we legally pay the least amount of tax possible in the corporate structure?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think there's, the regulations are slightly different here. Are there things that you think all trades businesses should be doing though as part of that process? You talked about claiming for tools and things like that. Are there a few watch outs that if someone's new to this, just set their business up and looking at that they should be aware of, or make sure they're planned for?
Yeah, I mean, I think like looking at what items you're going to need over the next six months or so.
Yeah.
And if any of those you're going to need in for us, the tax time ends in June. So, if you're going to need something in July, August, or September, it may make sense to bring forward those expenses so you can claim them at 30 June. Another thing we have here, I think, I'm not sure about New Zealand and England, but is superannuation. So, a lot of the times people might make extra contributions into super so that they can claim that on tax. Obviously, this is all general kind of stuff. There's no specific advice in this, but these are the types of things you should talk to your accountant about, just to see if it's going to be applicable to your situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I was going to sort of go back to, our discussion we had around sort of people that maybe have made the common mistakes you see. What are the things that you see good trades businesses doing well? The ones that have got it right, doing a really good job of running their business efficiently. Obviously, apart from hiring a great accountant and doing all those things, what else are they doing that you commonly see in those businesses that other people could learn from?
Yeah, no, 100%. That's a great question. I think that, and I've mentioned it a few times, starting with the end in mind, a lot of people that do well have a strategic plan, and then off the plan, they have KPIs they build off that, and it's all about execution. So they execute off the back end of the plan. And I think, the most successful business owners I work with have discipline, like they are very disciplined. So some things can get monotonous in business, like meetings, like, doing certain things that you don't always, it's not really exciting, so to speak, but having the discipline to make sure that you're always executing off the back end of the strategy. So, that's what I feel that successful business owners do. I think ones that aren't as successful, don't have much discipline, disorganized, unstructured, don't really have a grasp of what's going on, not job costing, all of those things are things that I see when people start struggling.
Yeah. Is that often when they're calling you in at that point, usually when things are starting to sort of fall over definitely, I think from a cash flow perspective, that seems to be where the issues are.
Yeah, at times, they're the ones that come, and it's about kind of educating on how to get some of those things in place.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, like I said, in the trade industry, it's not easy because, your revenue could go from 500,000 to 5 million in 8 months. So, and running a business doing 500,000 as opposed to 5 million is a totally different prospect. So there's skill sets that, you have to learn and you have to work on, like anything else.
And where you, as a business, I presume you've grown healthily. I think especially you mentioned earlier to me before we jumped on the podcast that COVID's made it easier for people to accept that they can work with anyone anywhere. It doesn't matter which state you're in and all those types of things. Where are you seeing the growth though in terms of your customers? Is there a particular sector that you're seeing more growth than others?
That's a hard one because pretty much at the moment all trades seem to be fairly busy. Like it doesn't seem to be and I'm with Australia in particular, we have a massive amount that we generally spend on going overseas and travel and everything like that. That's been stopped at the moment, apart from the New Zealand bubble, which is just open, but predominantly it's been stopped. So a lot of those people are spending money on renovations, new builds, housing. So the housing market's really kind of taking off. So, most trade business owners have got a lot of work on at the moment, from builders to plumbers to pretty much all the trades. So, there's not really one industry that shines out amongst the other ones at the moment. I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, everybody seems to be very
seems
busy.
to be across the board. And I guess for you, it's more of a company size thing, right? It's already more of those businesses that are either graduating, already reached that threshold of, several employees, and lots of vans and a certain amount of revenue that's starting to come through. So yeah, that makes sense. And then, we're finishing this financial year in 28 days. I think I'm getting that right. From today. Yeah, we're about to start the new year. Well, 28 days. If you're somewhere else in the world, it's probably 29 days. So I think we're ahead. But, at the end of that financial year, any advice as you enter the new financial year for things that trades businesses should do first or should prioritize as they start that new year?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think, doing some strategic planning should be, what you should be looking at to, at least map out your next kind of 12 months. Doesn't have to be too in depth, whether that's with a mentor, an accountant or somebody like that, and kind of, look at what you want to achieve in 12 months, maybe even 3 years. And then you can start off the back end of that. You can start to snip that down to smaller short-term goals. So I think doing some strategic planning, as I said before, the people I think that do better have a medium-term to long-term goals. Because once you do that, then, if you can just execute off the back of strategy, it actually takes a lot of distraction away from your day-to-day running of the business, because you kind of know what the overall strategy is. But it's when you're making things up as you go along, that's when I think you can get in trouble. So, I'd be advising people to look down and try and really map the next 12 months out on how that looks. And if you have, supply side issues, start to look at that. If you have labor issues, start to look at that and say, what is the business that you want to run? And it might be that you can only have 8 people because you can't hire any more people. So how do you maximize on the 8 people you have? How do you get your margins where you want them? Things like that, because then you're not as reactive, you're more proactive with the way that you're attacking the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Great. Fantastic. This has been really, really helpful, Bryn. And I could hear your phone was dinging there while we've been on this, which is a good sign. Because there's more of those trading companies either in trouble, asking for help with their end of year tax returns, or new customers hopefully coming through. So that's cool to see. We finished. I think hopefully our marketing team would have sent you some questions. They sent quite a lot. I'm not going to ask you all of these. They sent quite a long list, which I think will take some time to get through. But the first question was, what's the craziest expense you've seen a tradie try to claim in the world that you're in?
Probably for us, probably boats and jet skis,
Right.
I've just bought this new boat, can I advertise if I put banners on it and stuff like that? That's generally pretty crazy.
That's true. Okay. Yeah. All right. One of the other one was, this is what I guess this one is is probably a good warning sign for anyone listening around getting this stuff right. Is what's the worst penalty you've ever seen? For a trade company you've worked with that hasn't maybe done things the right way.
Yeah, and this one could be Australia kind of only, but with superannuation, it's a massive thing here at the moment. So, failing to pay super can give you some penalties. And, I've seen penalties in excess of $100,000, like just the penalty, not the actual amount that you have to pay, which, generally if you can't pay your super and then you've got this massive penalty, it's almost like a bullet to the business, so to speak, because you're not really going to be able to fix it from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely worth getting these things right. And is there any, sort of tied to that question, are any big things that most tradies and tradespeople that you work with aren't aware of related to tax? Any common thing that tends to be a surprise to people?
I just think, with your statutory obligations, it's just really the reporting part of it. Always report everything, and then on the back end, you can figure out a way around that. But I think the ones that aren't aware of, they get into trouble, and then I think if it's in England, they're lodging VAT, or Australia GST, but they get into trouble and they don't lodge, so they just go, oh, I can't afford the next one, I just won't lodge it, and then they end up with lots of non-lodgements. And all that will literally do is cost you more money because they'll fine you for it. So it it doesn't make sense. Speak to your accountant, get it lodged, and then figure out how you're going to pay it after you've lodged it. But just lodge everything so that way you're in compliance.
Yeah, that's good advice. And then, if you weren't an accountant and you were going to pick a trade, you're working with lots of tradies. Is there one? Do you turn your hand? Is there anything you would pick?
I definitely wouldn't pick concreting because I don't like getting up too early in the morning, and getting up at 3 or 4 a.m. doesn't really suit my lifestyle. That's for sure. So I'd probably more so go in terms of building. Being a builder, that'd probably be the better trade for myself.
Yeah, cool. All right. How would you rate your DIY skills? It's a question I don't usually ask any of our tradie people because I think they would, I'd imagine, it'd be quite high. But yeah, for you personally.
Oh, look, I did a bit of work around the house, and I'll generally get on kind of YouTube and look up how to do things. But to answer the question, I'd be below 5. I'd say about 3 to 5. I'd sit.
Good. Well, Bryn, you shouldn't be getting on YouTube. You should be ringing up your local tradie to come and help you do that work. Anyway,
I do that as well.
Yeah. It's the small things. No, fair enough. And then favorite, we usually ask our customers their sort of favorite on-site lunch. Do you have a preference?
Oh yeah, fair few. I like Guzman Gomez. I think that's probably going everywhere around the world at the moment. So Guzman Gomez do a kind of Mexican kind of nachos, burritos, stuff like that. That's more at the office lunch where Uber Eats or something will bring it over and
bring it over to you. Yeah,
kind of getting some nachos.
Yeah, nice, cool. And then last couple of questions. We talked about COVID. It looks like there are sporting events now starting to happen in Australia, which is good to see, and hopefully that will continue with sort of vaccine rollouts and all the rest of it. What would be your first kind of big event, musical sport that you would go to if you could?
Oh, look, I reckon the Bledisloe Cup would be a big one, although, it's pretty depressing when you're an Australian watching it at times. State of Origin's another one that we've got coming up here, which is always a really big one as well. So, those football kind of things is what I follow the most.
Yeah, cool. Good stuff. All right. And then last question, we're trying to, part of the intention of this podcast is to sort of inform and hopefully help people think differently about how they run their kind of trades business. That's why we were really keen to have an accountant on board. So thanks for joining. It's been really, really helpful and hopefully giving some practical advice to people. Are there other people you think we should speak to that you come up against, either tradies or people related to the trade business that you think we should speak to on the podcast? We ask all of our guests this.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, one of the areas I think is legal. Like, obviously, I'm an accountant, so we help business grow. But having a construction lawyer, being able to go over things with contracts and stuff like that. I don't know how applicable that'd be worldwide, but a lot of trade business owners struggle with understanding contracts, how they work, and the processes they need to follow. And if you're working with bigger builders, or if you're working, in that space, you really need to understand where you're liable, how the contracts work, because that can be the difference between, profitability or going broke, essentially. Right. So good construction lawyer would be my advice.
Yeah. No, I've heard that before, actually. I think you mentioned something earlier about, I had someone on here who's down in Dunedin, and he was talking about his business network, like local business networks. And that's actually how he identified the lawyer, accountant. Actually, I think he bought his fleet of trucks from the local car dealer who was also at that business network, which I think is really powerful. So it's definitely something worth thinking about. Great. Good advice. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Bryn, look, I really appreciate it. Thanks very much for joining. I think it's great to get the accountant perspective, especially in Australia for this time of year. It's important, and that was a really insightful conversation. I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And as always, to all of our listeners, if you could give us the 5-star reviews if you're listening on Apple and elsewhere, and tell your friends about it, that would be great. And speak to you next time. Cheers.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Behind the Tools is brought to you by Tradify, job management software for your trade business. If you enjoyed the podcast, let us know by leaving a review, and be sure to tell your mates about it. Email behindthetools@tradifyhq.com if you or someone you know would be keen to join the